Hello! In this video we are going to be looking at the very basics of Kant's deontological approach to ethics. It is one of several videos that I would advise you to watch, as each video after this one builds on the basics that we cover here. So I'm just going to give you a flavour of what's coming up in subsequent videos, and these are things that you need to know for the AQA examination. So we need to understand what the good will is. It's a species of practical reason, but we'll cover what that is in more detail later on. Maxims, these are action guiding principles that can be run through what Kant calls the categorical imperative, and to establish whether they are moral principles or not. We'll look at hypothetical imperatives, and these are means to ends imperatives. In other words, they are imperatives that suggest if you want something, then you must do something else in order to get it. So if you want to get some chocolate, the means to getting chocolate might be to go to the shops to get it. If you want to get an advantage over somebody, the means to do that might be to deceive them, and so on. Okay, these are hypothetical imperatives. They can never be moral imperatives, right? They can never be something that Kant would consider to be morally good. These can be contrasted with categorical imperatives. Now, a categorical imperative is one single formula, but you can have many categorical imperatives. These are essentially action guiding principles that you've run through the categorical imperative, which is the formula for determining what right action should be. All right, and then once we've looked at that, we'll look at things called contradiction in concept, contradiction in will, perfect and imperfect duties, and then the three formulations of the categorical imperative which relate to these things. All right, and it's worth bearing in mind that Kant is also a moral objectivist, meaning that he believes that through the categorical imperative you can find out moral truths, but through applying reason. And so this is something that you could actually weave into some of your work on meta-ethics as well when you're looking at moral realism. So, to go right back to the beginning, Kant's deontological approach to ethics is essentially a duty-based approach. All right? It comes from the Greek word dion, meaning duty. All right? And it represents one way in which we might combat some of the less agreeable conclusions that come out of utilitarianism. All right. For example, in the case of Bentham and Mill, sending an innocent person to prison is the morally right thing to do if it results in greater aggregate happiness and less fear and unhappiness. Singer, among other things, suggests that infanticide can be no more morally dreadful than the killing of one's pet dog, provided that the child does not have the capacity to develop a mental age more than that of the dog. So if the child, for example, has learning difficulties that mean that it won't ever gain cognitive awareness beyond that of an Alsatian, Singer says, although it's wrong to kill the Alsatian, it is no more wrong to kill the child, all things being equal, assuming its parents didn't love it, and so on and so forth. All right. And of course, utilitarianism does not consider there to be any moral absolutes. So there are no things that are right or wrong without any qualification. All right? Remember that utilitarianism judges what is right and wrong in terms of the outcome. Right? So anything can be on the table for a utilitarian. Right? Whereas for Kant, there are certain things that are right or wrong no matter what the outcome of your actions. All right. So yes, there are no actions that are right or wrong no matter what. There is nothing that is right or wrong in an unconditional sense. The moral worth of all actions, according to the utilitarian, is subject to an assessment of the consequences in terms of the maximization of happiness and the minimization of pain. All of that, however, doesn't allow room for intention. All right. So a utilitarian is not really concerned with the intention of the person performing the action. What they're really concerned about is the consequence of the action. All right, and to make this perhaps a little bit more comprehensible, imagine, for example, that I see someone that I really dislike drowning in a lake, right? And I think, you know what, this is a really good opportunity for me to get rid of them, because I see this big plank of wood by the edge of the lake, and I thought if I throw it into the water and I manage to hit them on the head, they'll go under and they'll drown, right? So I do this, I pick up this piece of wood and I lob it in the direction of the drowning person that I dislike, but because I'm a rubbish shot, right, the piece of wood lands next to the person, they climb on it and manage to save themselves. Now, according to the utilitarian, because the consequences of the action are that I've saved a life and therefore made this person's family happy and so on, I've actually done the right thing. My intention was completely the opposite. My intention was to kill this person, right? But I failed in that, I made a mistake, and I've ended up saving them. So the utilitarian doesn't care about my intentions, they only care about consequences. Now, Kant looks at it almost from the completely opposite direction. Kant cares about the intentions, acting for the sake of duty. He's not very interested in consequences at all. So Kant attempted to show what our duties are through the application of what he thought of as pure reason. All right? He didn't believe that the consequences of an action are the most important factors in determining moral rightness. Rather, moral truths, he believed, exist regardless of the consequences. So a simplistic way of summing up the deontological approach to ethics would be, what if everyone did that? All right? We have to rationalize moral truth from trying to answer the above question. So we have to think about, when we're going to do something, what if everyone did what we are about to do or what we are wanting to do? Okay? And Kant gives an example of somebody who borrows money with no intention of paying it back. So imagine if I wanted to borrow some money and I thought, well, I'll promise this person that I'll repay it, but I've no real intention of doing it. I have to think to myself, what if everyone did that? Right? What if everyone in the world did that whenever they wanted to borrow money? Okay? And through that, it becomes immediately obvious that there's a problem, right? If everyone made false promises when they were in need of money or anything else, then no one would ever be able to secure loans because the creditor would not believe a word they said. And indeed, the idea of a promise would probably collapse as well, right, if nobody kept their promises. So Kant says, therefore, it's obvious that it is wrong to universalize the idea that whenever you're in need of money, you should ask to borrow some, promise to pay it back, but with no intention of doing so. So you can see how that works, and also note the importance Kant places on intention. Okay, so this is how we establish what our duties are and why it's important that we should uphold such truths. There's also a flavour of the UN Declaration of Human Rights about Kantian ethics. So, for example, if you look at Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of person. That looks very much like a Kantian maxim. All right? And if you run it through the categorical imperative, it seems to work. In other words, if you imagine asking, what if everyone did that? It seems to be okay, right? Everyone has the right to life, liberty and security of person. Well, if everyone's got it, then everyone is going to get on pretty well. All right? And so you could argue that one of the things to come out of Kantian ethics from a practical point of view is that we think about everyone equally in that sense, right? In the way that the universal UN Declaration of Human Rights does. Now, Kant then makes a distinction between acting for the sake of duty and acting in accordance with duty. Now, acting for the sake of duty we've already seen a basic example of. So, never breaking a promise. If you borrow some money and promise to pay it back, you should always make sure you do that. because if you don't have any intention of paying it back, and you imagine what if everyone did that, then obviously the concept of a promise would collapse, alongside the possibility that anyone would ever actually borrow money, and so you can see the kinds of social issues that might create. But Kant says, look, there are people who act for the sake of duty like that. They realise that they must keep their promises for no other reason than it is a rational thing to do and that it is their duty. But there are also those who act in accordance with duty, but for motives that are not perhaps the best. All right? So, let's take another Kantian example. A shopkeeper who does not overcharge through duty can be said to have acted morally. Okay, so we can see that it is his duty to act in this way, insofar as if shopkeepers overcharged whenever they felt like it, then ideas of value would collapse. All right, so that seems to be straightforward. But it's also possible that a shopkeeper's actions could accord with duty, in the sense that that shopkeeper doesn't overcharge his customers, but acts from motives such as benefits to his business. So he's just trying to make sure he keeps his customers. All right? If that shopkeeper had a reputation for overcharging his customers, he would lose trade. So his motives are not born out of duty, right? They are born out of profit instead. But nevertheless, the action of not overcharging the customers is exactly the same. Right? So you can have two shopkeepers who act in identical ways, one for moral reasons and one for not so moral reasons. Okay, so in this case, it's an action that accords with duty, but is not done for the sake of duty. And this kind of action, Kant believes, has no moral worth. And once again, you can see how the emphasis is on intention. That's the end of this video, but next video we're going to go on to look at Kant in more sort of technical detail. We're looking at the goodwill and maxims and hypothetical and categorical imperatives.